He faked his death to test their hearts, but when they finally came running, what he discovered was far more painful than dying. The city stretched beneath the glass walls of Cole Enterprises, a kingdom of steel and silence. Inside, Richard Cole, 75, sat behind a desk large enough to bury his loneliness. His reflection in the glass tower window stared back, stern, tired, and very much alone. On his desk, a single framed photo of his late wife, Margaret, and their 2 children. It had been taken 25 years ago. Since then, neither the photo nor the man had moved. The boardroom door clicked open. "Mr. Cole," said Evelyn, his private nurse, stepping in softly. "It's time for your medication." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "I don't need it." "You collapsed last week," she reminded him. "The doctor said too much," he cut in, reaching for a file instead. "The company needs strength, not sentiment." Evelyn set the pill bottle down anyway. "And what about your family, sir? Do they need strength too?" Richard's eyes flickered. For a moment the question seemed to puncture the armor. "My family is very strong when there's money to be had." Across town, Laura Cole was kneeling on a tiled floor, helping an elderly woman sign a form. "Take your time, Mrs. Parsons," she said gently, steadying the woman's trembling hand. "Your son will see how much you love him when he reads this letter." The woman smiled faintly. "You must love your father very much, dear. You speak of him often." Laura's pen paused. Her smile didn't. "I used to," she said quietly. "Now I just hope he's well." Outside the community center, the autumn wind tugged at her hair. She looked at her phone, a missed call from Dad. Her thumb hovered over it, then she turned the screen off. That evening, Richard stood before his mansion's grand piano, the one Margaret used to play. The house echoed, hollow and gold. The staff moved quietly, like ghosts trained not to disturb. He turned to Evelyn. "They don't call, they don't visit. I could vanish tomorrow and Daniel would only notice when his trust fund froze." "Have you told them how you feel?" Evelyn asked gently. "Feelings are a currency I stopped trading long ago," Richard said, his tone somewhere between arrogance and ache. He sat down slowly, the weight of years heavy on his shoulders. "Do you know what I built this empire for, Evelyn?" "Your family," she replied. "Exactly. And what did I get? A son who counts my days and a daughter who counts my mistakes." He stared at his reflection in the piano's polished lid. His voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "Maybe I've spoiled them. Maybe they don't know love anymore, only expectation." The next morning, headlines spread across the business world. Cole Enterprises CEO hospitalized after collapse. The news traveled fast, faster than truth. Evelyn watched Richard scroll through the article, his lips curling slightly. "You leaked it," she realized. He looked up with quiet defiance. "Consider it an experiment." "An experiment? I want to see who shows up when they think I'm dying." Evelyn frowned, stepping closer. "Richard, this isn't a game." "Of course not," he said softly. "It's a test." He stood, leaning heavily on his cane. "For 75 years, I've built things that last. Buildings, companies, fortunes. But I never built love I could trust. So I'll fake what they value most, my life. If there's love left in this family, it'll surface now. If not—" He didn't finish. Evelyn's voice trembled. "And what if it's not the answer you want?" He turned toward the window, where the morning sun hit the skyline like gold on glass. "Then I'll know the truth," he whispered, "even if it kills me." That night, the mansion's lights burned late.
Evelyn filed the hospital reports, changed the medications, and deleted messages from Richard's doctor. All part of the lie. Richard dictated from his chair. Advanced heart failure, stage 3. Prognosis, 6 months. The words felt like nails in his own coffin. Yet beneath the stern composure, something flickered. Fear, or maybe anticipation. He leaned back, closing his eyes. In the quiet, he could almost hear Margaret's voice. "You can't buy their hearts, Richard. You have to open yours." He opened his eyes to the silence. "Evelyn," he murmured, "if they come, don't tell them the truth. Not yet." She hesitated. "Sir, lies have a way of becoming real." He gave a thin smile. "So does loneliness." The next morning, a car pulled up to the mansion gates, sleek, black, impatient. Daniel Cole, his 45-year-old son, stepped out with a phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, cancel the board meeting. I'll handle Dad's estate. Yes, if he passes." His tone was all business, even in grief rehearsal. Laura arrived later, quietly, in her old hatchback, parking far from the fountain. She sat in the car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, unsure why she'd even come. When she finally walked inside, Evelyn met her at the door. "Your father's resting," she said softly. Laura's eyes scanned the familiar hall, the same marble, the same portraits, untouched by time. "It's like nothing's changed," she whispered. "Some things never do," Evelyn replied. Laura stepped closer to the closed bedroom door. Her hand hovered near the knob, then fell away. From inside, Richard's voice, weak, rehearsed, called out, "Laura?" The sound froze her. Decades of anger and love clashed in one heartbeat. She took a deep breath and opened the door. "If someone you loved tested your care this way, pretending to be sick, would you forgive them or walk away forever? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below."
The news broke at dawn. Billionaire CEO Richard Cole battling terminal illness, family rushes to his side. It ran on every business network, every gossip page. The world buzzed, but inside the mansion, time stood still. Evelyn moved through the house quietly, managing phone calls and tears, real and fake ones alike. Richard sat in bed, the morning light cutting across his face like a confession. He had planned every detail, the diagnosis, the doctor's statement, even the public sympathy post from his company's PR team. It all unfolded like a chess match, and he was ready to see who would make the first move. The first to arrive, again, was Daniel. He swept into the room in a tailored suit, phone still in hand. "Dad," he said with rehearsed urgency, "I came as soon as I heard." Richard watched him. "You came from the office." Daniel chuckled awkwardly. "Well, yes, but of course, family comes first." Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed. She could see it, the calculation behind Daniel's smile. "Have you spoken to Laura?" Richard asked, voice low. "She's on her way, I think. I'll make sure she's briefed about estate matters." Richard's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He knew this game. He had played it his whole life. Boardrooms, contracts, trust built and broken on profit margins. The difference now was that this was family. Laura arrived an hour later. No grand entrance, no camera flashes, no designer coat. Just a simple gray cardigan and eyes that had already seen too much. Evelyn met her at the door again. "He's awake now. He's expecting you." Laura hesitated before walking in. Richard looked smaller than she remembered,
his silver hair a crown of surrender. The machines around him beeped softly, rhythmic, fake. "Hi, Dad," she said carefully. He smiled weakly. "You came." "Of course I came. They said you're—" Her voice faltered. Richard reached for her hand, the first touch in years. "It's not as bad as they say," he lied smoothly. "Just tired. The doctors exaggerate." Laura studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't look tired. You look staged." He flinched, a barely perceptible reaction. "Still the sharp one," he murmured. "Still the skeptic," she replied. Dinner that evening was a scene out of a play neither of them wanted to be in. The long oak table was set for 4: Richard, Daniel, Laura, and Evelyn. Silverware gleamed, candles burned, and silence filled the gaps where laughter used to live. "So," Daniel began, pouring wine, "the doctors say it's heart failure?" Richard nodded. "Progressive. They're giving me 6 months." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She hated how easily the lie rolled off his tongue. Daniel cleared his throat. "Then we should start discussing transitions. The board will need clarity. I can step in, of course, temporarily." Laura dropped her fork. The sound echoed. "You're already talking about replacing him?" she snapped. Daniel frowned. "Someone has to think ahead." "Maybe think about being his son first," she shot back. Richard raised a trembling hand. "Enough," he whispered, pretending to tire. "No fighting tonight." But inside his chest ached for reasons that had nothing to do with his heart. Laura turned to him, softer now. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I sighed. "You were busy living your life, and I didn't want to be a burden." "That's not your decision to make. You've already made enough of those for everyone." Evelyn looked at them, this fragile, fractured family, sitting under golden light that made their shadows look enormous. Later that night, Richard sat alone in his study. The candle nearly burned down. Evelyn entered quietly. "Sir, it's late. You should rest." He turned to her, voice frail now, but this time real. "They're all here, but I've never felt so far away." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Because you've turned love into a mirror, Mr. Cole. You keep testing it instead of trusting it." He looked away, the storm rumbling closer. "Maybe this test isn't for them anymore. Maybe it's for me." She had no answer. The next morning, Laura wandered the garden, the same one her mother used to tend. The roses were still perfect, meticulously pruned by hired hands. She sat on a stone bench, running her fingers over a flower's soft petals. For a moment she was 10 again, sitting beside her mother who had said, "Your father builds things to last, but hearts don't work that way, darling. They break when you stop using them." She blinked away the memory. Behind her, Daniel appeared, voice low. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Laura turned. "You don't believe him either?" He shrugged. "He's always believed in control, even over emotions. I wouldn't put it past him." "So why are you here?" He smiled faintly. "Same reason as you, I suppose. To see if the old man still has a heart." Laura stood, eyes narrowing. "Don't make this about business, Daniel." He smirked. "Everything's business to him. Why should it be different for us?" She walked away, disgusted. But as she did, her chest tightened, because deep down, she feared Daniel might be right. and that realization hurt more than she expected. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The storm outside began to gather, faint thunder in the distance. He opened his bedside drawer and pulled out an old photograph of Margaret holding a baby Laura. He stared at it until his eyes blurred. "Was I wrong?" he whispered into the dark. "Was love ever something I could build?" Evelyn entered quietly. "Sir, it's late. You should rest." He turned to her, voice frail now, but this time real. "They're all here, but I've never felt so far away." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Because you've turned love into a mirror, Mr. Cole. You keep testing it instead of trusting it." He looked away, the storm rumbling closer. "Maybe this test isn't for them anymore. Maybe it's for me."
If you were in Laura's place, torn between love and suspicion, would you stay to help or walk away from the lies? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how your heart would handle this moment.
Morning sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of the mansion, bright but cold. The storm had passed, yet the air inside still felt heavy, the kind of silence that carried secrets. Richard sat by the window, dressed neatly despite his supposed frailty. His reflection stared back at him, strong, alert, and alive. Too alive for a dying man, he thought bitterly. He touched the glass, his hand trembling slightly. He had always believed control was power. Now, as he watched his children circle like strangers, he wondered if control was just another kind of loneliness. Downstairs, Daniel was already on a call, hushed, urgent. "Yes, I understand," he said into his phone. "If my father passes within the fiscal year, the board transitions automatically. We'll need to secure public confidence, a family statement perhaps." He paused, glancing toward the hallway. "And yes, I'll handle my sister." Evelyn stood unseen near the door, eyes darkening. Every word confirmed what she already knew. Daniel wasn't there for love, only legacy. When he hung up, she stepped into view. "You know Mr. Cole doesn't need another executive. He needs a son." Daniel flinched. "You've overstepped." "Maybe," she said calmly, "but you're about to do the same, in a way you can't undo." Upstairs, Laura was unpacking boxes from her childhood closet. Old photographs, a ballet shoe, letters she never sent. At the bottom she found a small music box, one her mother had given her. When she opened it, the soft tune of Moon River played, her father's favorite song once. She sat on the floor, holding the box, tears threatening to fall. She whispered to the empty room, "I don't even know who you are anymore, Dad." A knock came at the door. Richard stood there, leaning on his cane, his performance as the frail man still convincing. "May I?" he asked. Laura nodded, quietly closing the music box. He looked at it. "Your mother used to play that when you couldn't sleep." "I remember," she said. "You were never there." His smile faded. "I was building something for us." Laura turned to him, voice trembling but sharp. "You were building walls, Dad, and you're still doing it, even now." Richard took a slow breath. "I'm trying to make things right." "Then stop pretending sickness and start being honest." The words cut deeper than she realized. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, he felt the weight of his lie pressing against his chest, heavier than any illness could be. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, a ritual from another time. Laura read quietly by the fire.
Daniel typed furiously on his laptop. Richard watched them, his children who once shared laughter, now sharing only silence. He spoke suddenly. "Do you two remember this room? You used to build pillow forts here when your mother was alive." Daniel didn't look up. "That was a long time ago." Laura closed her book. "Because we stopped being a family a long time ago." Richard's eyes softened. "Maybe that's my fault." Daniel snorted. "You think?" Laura shot him a warning look, but Richard only nodded. "I suppose I deserve that." He turned to Evelyn. "Could you bring the old photo albums?" She hesitated, sensing something in his tone, remorse, maybe truth. When she returned, he opened one, flipping through pages of birthdays, vacations, smiles frozen in time. He pointed at a photo. "This was the day we opened the first coal industries branch. You were both there." Daniel smiled faintly. "You gave me my first suit." Laura frowned. "And you missed my dance recital that same night." The room went quiet again. Richard's face fell. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family." Laura shook her head. "You were doing what was best for you." He closed the album slowly, his hand trembling. "Maybe that's why I'm alone now." No one replied. Later, Evelyn found him sitting alone in the study again. She approached gently. "You look tired." He exhaled. "I am, but not from the act, from the truth." Evelyn looked at him. "Then tell them." He shook his head. "If I do, I lose them." "And if you don't?" she asked softly. He stared into the dark fireplace. "Then I lose myself." Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his room drafting a press statement. Coal legacy continues through family leadership. He stopped typing when he saw an old photo on his desk. Him as a child sitting on his father's shoulders, both laughing. For a moment guilt flickered in his eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by ambition. "Legacy first," he whispered. That same night, Laura sat in the garden under the stars, holding the music box again. She saw a light flicker in her father's study window, his silhouette hunched, lonely, small. And for the first time, she felt something other than anger, pity, maybe even love. She whispered to the wind, "Why do you have to test us to believe we care?" The night carried no answer, only silence and the faint echo of Moon River playing somewhere in the house.
The following morning, the house felt different, quieter, yet humming with unspoken things. The scent of coffee and burnt toast drifted through the air. It was Evelyn who had cooked breakfast this time, not the staff. Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany table, pretending to eat slowly, his fork clinking against the porcelain. His children sat across from him, Daniel with his phone, Laura with a distant stare. It felt like a board meeting masquerading as family breakfast. "Daniel," Richard said finally, his voice rough, "why don't you put that away?" Daniel looked up, irritated. "I'm handling the press, Dad. They're already speculating about your condition." "My condition," he echoed quietly. "And what exactly are they saying?" He hesitated. "That coal industries is about to see a generational shift." Laura's jaw tightened. "You mean they think he's dying?" He shot her a cold glance. "That's the reality." "It's your reality, not his," she snapped. "Enough," Richard interrupted. His hand trembled slightly. "No more fighting at my table." The silence afterward was deafening. Evelyn glanced between them, her voice cautious. "Maybe it's time to talk about what happens next." Laura turned to her sharply. "Next?
He's still here." "I only meant—" But Laura was already standing. "You people are unbelievable." She stormed out, the sound of her heels echoing down the marble hallway. Later that day, Richard found her outside, by the lake, the same one where he used to take her fishing when she was small. The water shimmered in the sunlight, a mirror of everything unspoken between them. "You've always run to the water when you're angry," he said quietly. "It's the only place that doesn't talk back." He chuckled softly, but she heard the exhaustion behind it. "Laura, I know you think I'm some kind of monster. I don't think that. I know you're a man who values control more than people." Richard looked at the rippling surface of the lake. "Maybe control is the only thing I have left." "Then you have nothing," she said, turning to him. Her eyes glistened. "Because control doesn't hold your hand when you're sick. It doesn't care if you die alone." Her words struck deep, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He tried to respond, but a sharp cough tore through his chest. For a moment panic flared in Laura's eyes, until he waved it off with a weak smile. Just a tickle in the throat. She stared at him, suspicious. Something in his eyes didn't match the sickness he portrayed. "Are you sure?" "Of course," he said quickly. "The doctor says I just need rest." But she didn't believe him, not entirely. Back inside, Evelyn was rearranging Richard's medications when Daniel walked in. "You're really playing nursemaid now," he said, smirking. Evelyn didn't rise to the bait. "Someone has to care." He leaned against the doorframe. "You care a little too much, don't you?" Her hand froze over the pillbox. "What are you implying?" "Just that I see the way you look at him. You think you're the savior in this little play." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "And you think you're the heir." Daniel's smile vanished. "I am the heir." "No," she said quietly. "You're just another lost child trying to earn a ghost's approval." He stared at her for a long moment, speechless. Then he left, slamming the door behind him. Evelyn sank into a chair, her hands shaking. She whispered under her breath, "He doesn't deserve this." But whether she meant Richard or Daniel, even she wasn't sure. That night, Richard lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind wouldn't rest. He heard the faint creak of the door, and Laura's silhouette appeared, carrying a tray with soup. "You should eat," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You cooked?" "I reheated. Let's not get sentimental." But she stayed beside him as he ate. The warmth between them was fragile, like glass that might shatter at every word. After a moment, she asked, "Dad, what are you really afraid of?" He froze mid-bite. "What makes you think I'm afraid?" "Because every time you talk about dying, your hands stop shaking. That's not fear of death. That's fear of being found out." The spoon slipped from his hand, clattering into the bowl. For a moment, neither of them moved. He looked at her, eyes glistening with guilt. "Laura—" But before he could speak, she stood abruptly. "Good night, Dad." When she left, he whispered to the empty room, "I'm so sorry." Evelyn found him there later, the untouched soup cold beside him. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed. "You're losing them," she said softly. He nodded. "I know." "Then stop hiding." He looked away. "If I tell them, they'll never forgive me. Or maybe they finally will." He closed his eyes, weary. "Tomorrow. I'll tell them tomorrow." But tomorrow had its own plans. The next morning, Daniel burst into the study, face pale. "Dad, the press leaked it. They think you're on your deathbed. Stocks are dropping." Richard blinked, confused. "Leaked? From where?" Daniel hesitated. Someone close to the house, apparently. Probably a staff member. Evelyn's stomach sank. She knew what he was implying. Richard stood slowly. No, no one in this house would do that. Daniel's tone hardened. Wouldn't they? Evelyn has access to all your private calls. Laura, who just entered, glared at him. You think she'd sell us out? Daniel shrugged. Everyone has a price. The argument exploded, voices rising, truth spilling, blame flying. And through it all, Richard sat in silence, watching his family destroy itself over a lie he started. Something cracked inside him, something deep, something final. He slammed his fist on the desk. Enough!
The room went still. His voice thundered with the power of the man he truly was, not the sick old patient, but the CEO who had commanded empires. "Stop fighting," he shouted. "If you want to know who's to blame, it's me. All of it. The lie, the headlines, everything." The words echoed like a bomb. Laura's face went pale. What lie?" Richard's lips trembled. "I'm not dying." Silence. Then the shatter of a glass hitting the floor. Daniel's voice was ice. "You lied? To us?" Richard's eyes filled with tears. "I needed to know if you still cared." Laura stepped back, shaking her head. "Oh, my God." She turned and ran. Sometimes truth doesn't set us free immediately. It sets fire to everything that wasn't real. But only through that burning can something new begin. What would you have done if you discovered your parent faked an illness just to test your love? Would you forgive or walk away?
The night after the confession was the longest of Richard Cole's life. The mansion, once full of polite voices and distant footsteps, was now a cathedral of silence. Every clock tick echoed like judgment. He sat in the study alone, the dim light painting deep lines across his face. In the hearth, the fire had gone out. Outside his door, the family he'd spent 75 years building, in business, in blood, in silence, had scattered like ash. Down the hall, Laura sat on the floor of her old bedroom, knees drawn to her chest. The music box lay open beside her, but even its melody seemed hollow now. When Evelyn came to check on her, Laura didn't look up. "He lied to me," she said quietly. "He looked me in the eye and lied." Evelyn leaned against the doorway, unsure whether to enter. "He thought he'd already lost you." "Then he should have talked to me, not tested me like a lab rat." Her voice broke, trembling with anger and grief. "Do you know what that does to a person? To realize your love was being measured?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I think he knows now." Laura turned sharply. "You knew, didn't you?" Evelyn's silence was all the answer she needed. In another part of the house, Daniel was pacing the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what the board says. He's still alive, which means he's still chairman." A pause, then a sigh. "No, I didn't know about the lie, but it changes nothing. The company stands, the image stands." When he hung up, he caught his reflection in the glass, cold, tired, angry. For a fleeting second, he saw his father's face in his own, and it terrified him. He poured himself a drink, muttering under his breath, "You taught me this, old man, every bit of it." By dawn, the house was still and colorless. Evelyn entered Richard's study to find him slumped in his chair, staring at an old photograph.
his late wife, Margaret, holding a toddler, Laura, and a baby, Daniel. "She would hate me if she saw this," he whispered. Evelyn placed a hand on the desk. "She'd hate what it's become, yes, but not you." He looked up at her, his voice small. "Do you think that's a difference?" She hesitated, then asked softly, "Why did you do it, Richard? Really?" He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Because after she died, I didn't know how to talk to them anymore. Everything became business. Easier that way. Safer. And when I saw them drift, I thought maybe fear would bring them back." He swallowed hard. "Turns out fear only brings out the truth." Evelyn's eyes softened. "And what's the truth?" "That I'm the one who left them, not the other way around." Later that morning, Laura entered the study. Her face was pale but determined. "Daniel's packing," she said coldly. "He's done." Richard nodded faintly. "I expected that." "You should talk to him before he leaves," she added. "I don't have the right." Laura crossed her arms. "You're still his father. That doesn't expire." She turned to leave but paused. "You hurt us, Dad, but pretending to be dying doesn't erase what dying already did to this family." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Laura looked at the photo on his desk. "When Mom died, we lost you too." Her voice cracked then, but she held it together. "You didn't need to fake death to make us grieve. We've been doing that for 20 years. After she left, Richard's composure finally broke. His breathing grew ragged, tears falling silently down his wrinkled face. He whispered to the photo, "Maggie, what have I done?" The door creaked open again. This time it was Daniel. For a moment neither spoke. Then Daniel said, "I came to say goodbye." Richard nodded, his voice hoarse. "Where will you go?" "Back to the city. There's a board meeting Monday." "Of course," Richard murmured. Daniel's tone softened slightly. "You always said emotions have no place in business. I learned that from you." Richard looked up sharply. "And what has that given you?" He hesitated. "Success? Fear? Maybe both." Richard sighed. "I needed better lessons than yours." Daniel's eyes flickered with conflict. "You always said love was a weakness." "I was wrong. It's the only strength worth having." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, not forgiveness, but understanding. He took a deep breath. "Goodbye, Dad." And just like that, he was gone. That evening, Evelyn found Laura in the garden again, sitting by the lake as twilight painted the water in soft, bruised colors. "Your father's asking for you," she said. Laura shook her head. "I don't know if I can." Evelyn sat beside her. "Do you know why he's so afraid of dying?" "Because he's a control freak?" Laura said bitterly. "No," Evelyn whispered. "Because he's never really lived. Not since your mother passed." Laura frowned, glancing at her. Evelyn hesitated, then continued. "He used to sit by that window every night staring at her photograph. He'd talk to her like she was still there. He even kept her perfume bottle. It's empty, but he still uncaps it sometimes, just to smell it."
Laura blinked back tears. "I didn't know that." "He never wanted you to," Evelyn said. "He didn't want you to see the cracks." Laura looked at the lake again. "Maybe if he'd shown them sooner,
we wouldn't have broken this far. Inside, Richard wrote a letter, his handwriting shaking. Laura, Daniel, if love were a business, I'd have been the richest man alive. But love is not profit, it's risk, and I've failed that investment for too long. Whatever you decide, to forgive me or not, know that I finally see you, and I'm proud of who you became, even without me. Dad. He folded the letter, sealing it with the wax stamp his wife once gave him. Later that night, he walked out to the garden, finding Laura still by the lake. The air was cool, the moon rippling across the water. He handed her the envelope. She didn't take it immediately. "What is this?" "My last business transaction," he said softly. "No contracts, no clauses, just truth." Laura opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the trembling handwriting. When she finished, she looked up, tears streaming silently. "Do you really mean all this?" He nodded, every word. "Then stop writing letters and start being a father," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Is that an invitation?" She nodded. "It's a start." They stood there in silence, the night holding its breath. For the first time in decades, Richard didn't feel like a CEO or a failure or a test maker. He just felt human, fragile, forgiven, and maybe, finally free. When the truth shatters everything you built, you can either build the same walls or finally build bridges. Have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you deeply, not because they deserved it, but because you needed peace?
Morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the Cole mansion, soft and golden, the first gentle sunrise in weeks. The house that had echoed with shouting now hummed with something else. Quiet. Honest quiet. Richard sat by the window, wearing a cardigan instead of a suit for the first time anyone could remember. His cane leaned beside the chair, untouched. The steam from his tea curled upward like a small prayer. He heard footsteps approach, lighter ones, familiar ones. "May I come in?" Laura's voice, soft but uncertain. He smiled faintly. "I'd have been disappointed if you didn't." She stepped inside, holding a folded blanket. "You always hated this one," she said with a teasing tone. "Said the color looked like wilted roses." He chuckled. "I was wrong about a lot of things, it seems." "Yeah," she said gently, placing it over his legs. "You were." There was silence then, not tense, just full. "Where's Daniel?" he asked quietly. "Gone. For now." He nodded, sadness flickering through his eyes. "I can't blame him." Laura tilted her head. "You can blame yourself, though. You're good at that." He looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled ruefully. "I suppose guilt is easier to manage than love. Try love instead." That line hung in the air like the faint scent of rain, unexpected and cleansing. Later that day, they sat outside on the porch together. The garden had begun to bloom again after the storm, daffodils pushing through damp earth. Laura poured lemonade the same way her mother used to. She handed him a glass. "You know, when Mom was alive, we used to sit here waiting for you to come home." He froze, the glass trembling slightly in his hand. "And I never did." "Not once," she said quietly. "We'd hear your car, get excited, and then the phone would ring, and Mom would tell us he got caught at work." He looked down, the memory cutting like a blade. "I thought I had time. There's always another deal, another meeting. I didn't realize time was what I was losing." Laura watched him. Not angry now, but sad for what could have been. You know what's funny? I used to think if I ever saw you cry, I'd feel vindicated, like it would prove you had a heart. And now? He asked. She smiled faintly. Now I just want you to be okay. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, she said, but forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing peace. That evening, Evelyn joined them for dinner. A simple meal, nothing formal. Richard insisted they eat at the smaller dining table instead of the grand hall. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. Evelyn, thank you for staying through all this. She smiled softly. It's what family does. Laura looked at her with surprise. Family? Evelyn hesitated. I don't mean by blood. I just mean the kind that doesn't walk away when it's hard. Richard nodded, his eyes warm. I've learned that kind of family is worth more than every dollar I've made. The words landed heavy in the air, and real. After dinner, Laura found herself laughing for the first time in years. They played a slow, clumsy game of cards by the fire. Richard lost on purpose, pretending to pout. Unbelievable, she teased. The man who built an empire can't win at gin rummy? He smirked. Maybe I'm finally learning to let someone else win. The laughter that followed wasn't just sound, it was healing. Later, as the fire dimmed, Richard grew quiet again. Laura, I don't know how much time I have left, and I mean that honestly this time. But if I could ask one thing of you. She looked up. What? Don't let bitterness be your inheritance. You deserve more than that. Her eyes shimmered. I already got my inheritance, she whispered. He frowned. You did? She nodded. You finally said you're proud of me. They sat there in silence again, the flames casting a gentle glow across their faces. In that fragile peace, they weren't CEO and daughter anymore. Just a father and a child, two imperfect hearts trying to remember how to love. A week later, the house began to feel alive again. Richard started walking in the garden each morning, slowly but with purpose. Evelyn brought fresh flowers into every room. And Laura stayed. She helped organize the household, managed calls, even laughed with the staff she once avoided. Every day she'd spend an hour with her father, reading aloud or just sitting quietly together. Sometimes they'd talk about her childhood, sometimes about her mother. Sometimes they'd say nothing at all. The silence, for once, wasn't empty. One afternoon, as they walked by the lake, Richard stopped and said softly, I'm scared. Of what? She asked. He looked at the reflection of the house in the water. That you'll leave before I have the chance to be the father I should have been. Laura smiled through her tears. Then you'd better start now.
It had been 3 quiet weeks since the truth came out. The house, once heavy with secrets, now echoed with something new. The sound of ordinary life. For the first time in decades, Richard Cole was simply living. He and Laura shared breakfast on the terrace. The air smelled of coffee and blooming jasmine. Evelyn arranged flowers nearby, humming softly. You know, Laura said, smiling, I forgot mornings could be peaceful. Richard chuckled. You get used to chaos when you run a company. Still feels strange not having 10 phone calls before 8 a.m. Maybe that's a good thing, she said. He nodded. Maybe it is. But then a shadow crossed his face. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. Dad? Laura asked quickly. He steadied it with effort, forcing a smile. Just a little dizzy. Evelyn turned, alarmed.
You should rest." "I'm fine," he said, waving it off, but his voice lacked conviction. Later that afternoon, Laura went into town for groceries. When she returned, the front door was wide open. The house was too quiet. "Evelyn?" she called. No answer. Then she heard it, a crash from upstairs. She ran, heart racing. At the top of the staircase, she found Evelyn kneeling on the floor beside Richard, who was slumped against the wall, pale, breath shallow, eyes half open. "Call the doctor," Evelyn cried. Laura froze for a second, disbelief, terror, guilt, then sprinted for the phone. Her voice shook as she spoke into it. "Yes, it's Richard Cole. Please hurry, he's collapsed." She dropped the receiver before the operator finished. When she returned, Evelyn was holding his hand. "Stay with us, Richard, stay." He tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. Don't be angry." Laura knelt beside him, tears already streaking down her face. "Just breathe, okay? We'll get you help. You're going to be fine." But he wasn't listening. His eyes were unfocused, distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. And then, almost too softly to hear, he said, "Tell Daniel, I'm sorry." An ambulance came. The staff stood in silence as paramedics rushed through the hall. The house, once filled with laughter and forgiveness, now pulsed with fear. Evelyn rode with him. Laura followed in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Rain began to fall again, sudden and merciless. It drummed against the windshield like a cruel echo of the night everything fell apart weeks ago. She whispered to herself, "Not again. Not like this." At the hospital, time lost meaning. Machines beeped. Nurses moved with quiet urgency. Laura stood by his bedside, holding his hand. The monitors flickered. His breathing came in shallow bursts. Evelyn sat quietly in the corner, tears glistening but unshed. After what felt like hours, the doctor stepped in. "He's stable, for now, but he needs rest. His heart is weak, and the stress didn't help." Laura's voice cracked. "Will he recover?" The doctor hesitated. "He might, but it's a fragile might." That night, Laura refused to leave the hospital. She sat by his bed, watching him sleep. The lines on his face looked deeper, but there was peace there, strange peace. She whispered, "You fooled us with a fake illness, and now life gives you a real one. Is this the universe punishing you or saving you?" No answer came, only the faint, rhythmic sound of the heart monitor. The next morning, as light crept through the blinds, the door opened. Daniel walked in. Laura stood, shocked. "You came?" He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Evelyn called me." For a long moment, he just looked at his father, the man he'd both admired and resented his entire life. "He looks smaller," he murmured. "He was never as big as he thought," she replied. Daniel sighed. "I know." He turned to her. "I messed up. I was angry and greedy and blind." "So was he," she replied. "Maybe that's the problem. You're more alike than either of you want to admit." Daniel gave a weak smile. "Yeah, guess so." He moved closer to the bed. His father's hand twitched slightly. Daniel took it, hesitantly at first, then firmly. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm here. You can stop fighting." Richard stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Daniel, a faint smile crossed his lips. "You came.
"Yeah," he said, voice thick. "I'm sorry." Richard reached up weakly and touched his son's cheek. "No, I'm sorry. For teaching you success before love." Daniel's face crumpled. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against his father's hand. "We can fix this, Dad. Just stay." Richard closed his eyes again, the heart monitor steady, but fragile. And in that moment, for the first time, father and son held each other, not as rivals, but as two broken men learning how to forgive. Back home that evening, Laura stood by the window, watching the storm fade once again. Evelyn joined her quietly. "Do you think he'll make it?" she asked. Laura didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she said finally. "But maybe that's not the point anymore." "What is?" She turned to her with wet eyes. "That he finally knows we care."
The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and sleeplessness. For 2 days, the beeping of the heart monitor had been the only rhythm guiding Laura's world. Richard had not yet opened his eyes. Doctors said his vitals were steady, but fragile. It could go either way. Laura sat by his bed, whispering prayers she didn't know she remembered. Evelyn sat on the other side, hands clasped. Daniel came and went, pacing outside, haunted by guilt. The air between them was heavy, like a room waiting for truth. That night Laura went down to the chapel on the hospital's lower floor. It was empty, except for the faint flicker of candles and the soft hum of the air conditioner. She sat in the back pew, hands trembling. Her reflection in the candlelight looked tired, older, but softer. She whispered, "You tried to teach us love through a lie, Dad, and now you're teaching it by almost dying." She closed her eyes. "I hated you for testing us, but I think I finally understand. You wanted to see if your success meant anything, if you meant anything without your money." Tears slid down her face. "You do. You always did. You were just too afraid to believe it." Behind her, a voice said quietly, "You sound just like Mom when she used to talk to him." Laura turned. Daniel stood at the door, leaning against the wall, his expression unreadable. He walked closer and sat beside her. "She used to come here," he said. "After the board meetings, when Dad stayed late, she'd pray for him to slow down, said he was killing himself trying to be the man the world demanded." Laura smiled faintly. "And now, he's still paying the price." Daniel exhaled heavily. "I spent half my life trying to prove I wasn't just his shadow, and the other half resenting him for making me feel like one." "Maybe he never meant to," Laura said softly. "He just didn't know how else to love." Silence lingered between them. Then Daniel asked, "Do you think it's too late for us? For this family?" Laura turned, eyes shimmering. "No, but it's our turn now, to choose what we make of what's left." He nodded slowly. "Then let's start with this." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick, worn, familiar. "What's that?" "It's his will. He updated it last year. Everything, the company, the estate, it's all split between us." Laura blinked. "You mean—" "Yeah," he said quietly. "I could have hidden it, but I won't. Not anymore." She stared at him, a mix of surprise and pride. "Maybe you're finally more like him than you think." Daniel gave a small smile. "Maybe, but for once that doesn't scare me." The next morning when they returned to his room, Richard's eyes were open. He looked frail but present, more alive than he had in days. Laura gasped softly, "Dad!" He smiled weakly. "You looked like you'd been crying."
She laughed through her tears. "You scared us half to death." He glanced at Daniel. "Even you?" Daniel stepped closer. "Yeah, even me." For a long moment the three of them just looked at each other, the silence no longer awkward, but full of everything they couldn't put into words. Richard gestured toward the window. "You know what I realized, lying here?" "What?" Laura asked. "That the world doesn't end when you stop running. It just gets quieter. And in the quiet, you finally hear what matters." Evelyn entered then, eyes wet with relief. "He's awake," she whispered, rushing to his side. He smiled faintly at her. "You stayed," she said softly. "Of course I did. Someone had to make sure you kept your promises." He chuckled weakly. "Then I suppose I owe all of you the truth." He looked at his children, really looked at them as if seeing them for the first time. "I thought I was testing your love," he said slowly, "but I really was testing my own, and I failed." Laura squeezed his hand. "No, Dad, you just took the long way home." That evening, as the sun set behind the hospital, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Richard insisted on being wheeled outside. He wanted to feel the air again. Daniel pushed his wheelchair. Laura walked beside them, Evelyn trailing behind with a blanket. Birds crossed the sky above, and for a long, quiet moment they stood watching. Richard exhaled, voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think legacy was what you built. Turns out it's who stays after everything else falls apart." Laura bent down and hugged him. Daniel joined, one hand resting on his father's shoulder. For the first time in years, no one was pretending, no one was testing or proving or hiding. They were simply together. Reflection. Sometimes love doesn't come as a grand revelation. It comes as a quiet choice made over and over again, even after disappointment, even after pain. If you were in Daniel or Laura's place, would you have forgiven their father? Or would the betrayal have been too much to look past? Comment below.
It was a bright morning in late spring, the kind of morning that carried the promise of new beginnings. The Cole mansion, once a hollow monument to wealth, now breathed again. Windows were open, laughter drifted through the halls, and the scent of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. Richard had returned home 2 weeks after the hospital. His recovery was slow, fragile, but steady. Outside, the garden was alive. Flowers Evelyn had planted months ago were finally blooming, pale lavender and white roses bending gently under the sunlight. He sat there now, wrapped in a blanket, watching the world go by. His face looked older, but softer, like a man finally unburdened. Laura joined him with tea. "You're quiet this morning," she said. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking how strange it feels to have peace." She chuckled. "You earned it." He shook his head. "No, I almost lost everything to get it." Daniel appeared a few minutes later, carrying a wooden box. "What's that?" Laura asked. Daniel set it on the table. "Something Dad asked me to bring from the office." Richard gestured for him to open it. Inside was a collection of photographs, old, faded, creased at the corners. Family trips, Christmas mornings, a young Richard holding Laura as a baby. And in the middle, one picture of his late wife, Maria, smiling under sunlight, eyes bright and alive. "She kept those," Laura whispered, touching the photo gently. "Mom always said pictures were proof that happiness existed." Richard's eyes grew glassy. "She was right, and I forgot that for too long." He leaned back, looking between his children.
I built a company worth billions, but none of it means a damn thing if I can't leave you with more than money. I want to leave you peace." Laura swallowed hard. "You already have." That afternoon, the family gathered under the large oak tree by the lake, a spot Maria had loved. Evelyn brought blankets, and Daniel set out a small speaker playing soft jazz. It wasn't a celebration. It was something better, a moment of stillness, shared without words. Richard looked at the water shimmering in the sunlight. "You know, when I pretended to be sick, I thought I was revealing the truth about my family, but I didn't realize it would reveal me." Laura smiled gently. "Maybe that's what it was always meant to do." He laughed quietly. "I suppose so. Life has a way of writing lessons we didn't sign up for." Daniel nodded. "And sometimes those lessons fix what we never thought could be fixed." As the evening settled, Richard looked toward the setting sun. "Laura," he said softly, "do you remember the night I told you to go after what mattered most?" "Yes," she replied. He took her hand. "You were what mattered most, you and your brother. I just didn't realize it soon enough." Laura's eyes shimmered. "You still did, Dad. That's what counts." Evelyn watched quietly from a few feet away, smiling through tears. She'd served this family her entire life, but now it felt like she was part of it. That night, after everyone went inside, Richard stayed out by the lake a little longer. The moon reflected on the still water. He whispered to the night, "Maria, they're going to be okay." He closed his eyes for a moment, not in sadness, but gratitude. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Daniel. "Dad?" Richard turned. "Couldn't sleep either?" Daniel shook his head. "Just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on us." Richard smiled. "No, son, thank you for coming back." They stood there together in silence, father and son, side by side, the ghosts of the past finally at peace. The next morning, Laura found a note on the dining table in her familiar handwriting. "My dear Laura and Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm resting now. Not gone, just finally at rest inside myself. You gave me what I spent my whole life chasing. Not success, not admiration, but love without condition. Promise me you'll keep the laughter, not the legacy. That's what matters. With all my heart, Dad." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was steady, calm, final, hold. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the family photos on the mantelpiece. Evelyn entered quietly behind her. "Is he sleeping?" Laura nodded, smiling faintly. "He's peaceful." Weeks later, the company Richard built held a press conference announcing his retirement. The new CEO, Daniel Cole, stood before the cameras, his sister by his side. When asked about his vision for the company, Daniel didn't speak about profits or strategy. He simply said, "My father taught me that success means nothing if it costs you the people who love you. From now on, that's our legacy." The audience applauded softly, sensing the weight behind his words. Laura glanced at him with quiet pride. That evening, after the conference, the siblings returned to the lake, now their father's favorite spot. They sat together under the oak tree, the same jazz melody playing from the speaker, the sun dipping below the horizon. Whispered, "He finally got what he wanted." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, so did we." A breeze rippled through the trees, gentle, warm, carrying the faint scent of lavender and rain. For a moment they both felt it, as if he were still there, watching, smiling. And maybe, in a way, he was. Final reflection. In the end, love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. It forgives, rebuilds, and endures even after a lifetime of mistakes. Comment below. Do you believe people can truly change even after decades of living the wrong way? What lesson did you take from Richard's journey? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful life stories that remind us what truly matters.